All right, greetings from the Dark Continent, Conscious Carjacker here, or Adams van Sail, here to shine a light on the goings-on down south, and you might recognize my guest here tonight. He is my AfriForum colleague and friend, Jacques Broodryk, and he was on my channel previously to talk about his first wildly successful documentary, Open Borders, and that one specifically focused on the border between South Africa and Zimbabwe. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the sequel to that documentary called Open Borders, the Carjackers Carnival. And this one focuses on specifically the border between South Africa and Mozambique. So that's going to be a very interesting topic to get into, seeing as I think specifically in South Africa, since the last documentary aired, this topic of border security and what can be done and what is being done has just become more and more relevant as time progressed. So welcome back on the show, Jacques, and I look forward to our conversation.
Good evening, Adams. Thank you very much for having me, and good evening to your viewers. Let me just start off by apologizing if my set lighting isn't perfect. We're currently being load shed, so we're making plans, but the laptop's fully charged, so I guess it'll last the conversation.
Well, like I said, it adds that third world aesthetic. Jacques, let's start off before we get to the latest documentary. Let's start off with the first one because a lot has happened since in the meantime. What's been the feedback on Open Borders 1 in the meantime? What's been the reaction from the public? How was it received?
Well, it's actually been an interesting journey. From the public side, it's been received very positively. People are aware of the issues on the border, and those who weren't aware of how bad it is are aware of it now. So we received a lot of support from the South African public from all walks of life and different societal groups. But then on the other hand, we also had an interesting reaction from government side. Our neighborhood watchers and our volunteers have a very good working relationship with police officers and law enforcement on the ground. But we found that after we aired the first Open Borders, which was focused on the Zimbabwean border, in the Beitbridge area, some of those officials were actually directly instructed by superiors that they weren't allowed to participate in neighborhood watch activities with AfriForum any longer because of the political pressure that was put on government after we released the documentary. So it was a bittersweet victory. We've garnered a lot of support, and a lot of people are contacting us to see how they can get involved and how they can support our efforts. But then also from government side, we've had this knee-jerk reaction, which I think is very unfortunate.
Well, isn't that very telling, where if you didn't get this type of reaction from government, there wouldn't be a need for any of these types of teams and efforts that you've been showing and demonstrating with these documentaries. If the government was just doing its job and fulfilling its mandate and not being an obstacle in the way of citizens, then those citizens wouldn't have to do anything in the first place. But it's an unfortunate state of affairs where we find ourselves, like I said, where government is an obstacle rather than a facilitator.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that because I definitely think that the South African government is feeling the pressure. We saw after the release of the first Open Borders and shortly after that, we launched the Border Watch Initiative, that government rushed through the Border Management Authorities Act, or the formulation of the guards anyway that they deployed. Those guards were deployed illegally in a rushed situation without matching uniforms, etc. I think in the meanwhile, after we addressed them on the issue, they have rectified the legislation to accommodate that. But it was a knee-jerk reaction. They had to rush because there was all this public pressure on them. Now, that border force, unfortunately, hasn't had much of an impact. I get direct feedback from our guys on the ground of what they're up to. And it's more of a PR exercise than anything else. And we saw the same thing now after the release of the second Open Borders too. I think it was a few days ago, the Minister of Defense, Tani Modise, during a debate on cross-border crime, actually said that it's time to reinstate certain elements of the commando system. Now, that's something I never thought we'd hear coming from an ANC government official, but they can certainly see that the pressure is on. The South African public is tired of this criminal mess and this lack of governance, and people are starting to take action themselves. And government, from a political side, know that they need to get in with that wave, or they'll be left behind.
And getting to open borders too, seeing as well. Firstly, like I said, I don't think anyone had any doubts that you'd be making a sequel, seeing as the first one did so well. I think it's sitting at 120,000 views right now. The first open borders documentary. I mean, there's a massive mandate given to you now you have to create a second one. But that aside, the success of the first one aside, what motivation is there behind choosing the specific subject matter for the second one? Because I mean, you're going to have to follow up a very successful documentary. How did you choose specifically the South African and the Mozambique border to be the sequel to that?
So I used to be an investigative broadcast journalist, and during my career as that, I covered a lot of cross-border crimes and issues on the border. So I've been very well aware of the issues on the South African borders for quite a number of years, and I had quite a bit of, I'd say, in-depth knowledge on the topic. So when we decided to do the first one, we immediately said, if we pull this off, if it works, we have to follow it up, because we don't only have one border. We have borders with many countries. So that was part of the plan from the beginning to possibly do follow-ups, possibly look at other border areas apart from Zimbabwe. And that's exactly what we did in the second one. We looked at the issues on the Mozambican border.
Mm. And the key issue there inspired the title of your documentary, and that is the Carjacker's Carnival. Now, that's specifically the focus of your documentary, the location of it aside. I mean, I don't have to ask, why did you choose this as a focus? Your documentary speaks for itself, but specifically not why did you choose it, but why is this the case, that there is this massive issue on the South African Mozambican border, specifically as it relates to stolen vehicles? Do you have any background on that? Why is that such a key issue there?
Yeah, I have a theory about that, and it's that it comes down to natural barriers. That's actually the crux of the matter. So if you look at the border we have with Zimbabwe, we have a very big river flowing through there. So that complicates issues. It complicates getting cars across. It complicates getting large cargo across. Even though the guys still do it, it complicates the matter, and it leaves them exposed for longer. With the Mozambican border, you have less of those challenges. You have a few smaller streams. You have a mountain range, which isn't extremely steep, but which is quite terraneous. It's difficult to cross, but it's doable. So I think that plays a role. And of course, we know that the Mozambican border was used for many years by the African National Congress to smuggle members of Mkhonto Sizwe across the border, as well as firearms, etc., to perform acts of what I would refer to as terror in South Africa. And those smuggling routes seem to still be active. People who live in those remote areas know the pathways, they know the hideouts, they know where to go. And those same routes have just been hijacked by criminal syndicates now.
And you see these routes actually in your documentary. It's almost like wildlife trails. You can see where the routes that they use the most are the most trodden out, and you can actually see them. You actually walk along one of them in the documentary. But maybe before, I think the next natural question would be talking about specifically what you saw there. For people that haven't seen the documentary shows this very clearly, but in your own words, what is the state of the South African Mozambique border, having experienced it in person?
I'd say it's basically non-existent. The thing is, there used to be a very well looked after border fence, and the same with that we used to have on the Zimbabwean border. Used to be an electrified fence, 6 foot high, with barbed wire, rows of barbed wire on both sides, various lanes of barbed wire. It was very, very difficult to get across. That has just simply not been maintained. The electrified fence part was switched off many years ago due to pressure from human rights activists, because a lot of illegal immigrants were getting caught up in this electrified fence, which obviously is a horrible situation to be in, especially if you're fleeing a war in Mozambique. But so the fence was switched off, and from there on, no other plans were put in place to fill the void that was left there. And we also know with the disbandment of the commando system, that also left a huge gap in 2003, when groups of trained and organized volunteers working hand in hand with the military were always on the ready in those rural areas to respond to indicators where the fence line had been crossed or cut. and they would respond and they would apprehend those people, and that was disbanded. So it left a major void, and the South African government has simply done nothing to actually fill that void except leave us with empty promises.
Yeah, and the striking image in your documentary is you can actually see the remains of that previous electrified fence that you were talking about. You walked past some of the wreckage or the ruins of it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, that part of the fence there. So the Mozambique border is quite a long stretch of land. It stretches through a few provinces in South Africa. So it's a vast area to police, but it comes back to whether there's a political will to actually do this or not, and there clearly isn't. I mean, if you look at the areas around, say, Shushului and Nguzi, where carjacking smuggling is a big problem because it's more flat terrain. It's easy to get across the border. It's getting nearer to the ocean, so things flatten out. There, the community has erupted in protest many times. A few years ago, it was a massive problem. They got very violent because they were simply fed up because they're obviously feeling the consequences of the crime that's happening there. So the South African government came up with an idea. They were going to build cement pylons along that stretch of the border to prevent the cars from getting smuggled across. Okay, so that's a good idea. I would support that. Apart from the fact that a few months later, it turned out that the contract for producing the cement were those people involved in a corrupt tender, and it all got halted. So how do you solve problems with these people? It reminds you of that nursery rhyme. There's a hole in my bucket. You're trying to fill in one hole, and then the next one just erupts because these politicians are so corrupt and simply not interested in serving the country.
Right, and that's actually the thumbnail of today's conversation, is where one of those attempts went wrong, where they tried to smuggle one of those stolen vehicles, over those cement pylons. So you can see they're still there, and but the smugglers are building ramps to get over them, and as you said, they're not even complete. It's just one little section that's still left. But I asked you the same question in the previous documentary, but again, for those that didn't listen to that interview. Everything you see in this documentary, everything you're in the thick of it there, quite literally in the thick of the bush. You're there on the border. But I just have to, not clarification, but just to make everyone aware, none of this is dramatized. You're not here in a field here in Centurion pretending it's the Mozambique border. You are there. You're hearing voices around you. Those could be smugglers. Those could be military personnel on the Mozambican side. Those could be anything. Those could be any type of criminal that you're hearing out there. The danger and everything that you show us there is real, just for clarification.
Yeah, no, nothing is staged in this documentary. Everything happened exactly as we portrayed it. And I think the important thing to take home from this is those are the risks that civilian safety structure volunteers and AfriForum Neighborhood Watch volunteers take on a daily basis. So it might seem extravagant and hardcore to the average viewer, but there are people out there who work 8 to 5 jobs, have families, but they take on these risks without compensation in their spare time to try and make a difference in their community. So the risks are absolutely real. Anyone can go and look up the shooting incidents that have taken place between hijackers of vehicles and the South African Defence Force, as well as between South African Defence Force and the Mozambican military personnel. And those things are swept under the rug quite quietly. We don't hear much about it, but it does take place. So the risks are very real. When you're in those areas, you don't know who you're up against. You don't know whether it's South African soldiers. If it's them, how are they going to react? Are they going to shoot without asking questions? Is it Mozambique military personnel, or are these guys criminals? You don't know who you run into. So it's a very tense situation. And I really have to take my hats off to the people who do this to try and protect their communities.
And it's such an important point. You made this in our previous chats about your previous documentary as well. But these people aren't getting paid. They are volunteers. These are people taking time out of their lives to protect their communities and their families. They're not doing it because it's their hobby. They're doing it because they have to. It's I think that's one of the critical points that both of your documentaries, the first one and the second one, brought forward, is the fact that this isn't some force where they are getting a monthly wage or salary for doing this. They are doing it because they have to. They're doing it out of necessity. They're doing it not because they hate what's in front of them, but because they love what's behind them.
That's exactly spot on. I can't agree with that anymore. These actions are actions that started taking place out of a need for safety and security, not because anyone wanted to achieve something, but simply because there was a desperation and they had to start doing something about it. And over the years, we've gotten better at it. Our surveillance safety structures have gained a lot of experience. We do a lot of training, both legally and tactically. People are getting very, very good at what they're doing. But like you said, it's still something that the people do out of choice. These are volunteers, and there's no compensation involved. There are no medals. All that you go to bed with is knowing that you made a difference in making your community and your family a little safer that night.
Yeah, absolutely. And these people should be applauded. Jacques, in regards to this second documentary, what were some key challenges that you experienced while making this one? I think the terrain's definitely different. I think that's an obvious one. You're working with different types of criminal syndicates here. But what are some of the things that comes to mind when it comes to specifically the production of this documentary? What were some key challenges that you had to overcome?
Well, look, first of all, it's a very challenging thing to film. It's very difficult because you have to film things on the run, and nothing's staged, nothing is pre-planned. We have to capture what we experience in the moment, so that makes it very challenging from a
No, you can't really write a script.
No. I mean, you need to go there, up there, experience it, film it, and then come back and put the story together. So you can't go there with the script and preemptively decide what story you're going to tell. But without doubt, personally, the hardest part of making these documentaries have been to tell the story in a truthful manner, to showcase the story visually in a truthful manner without putting our volunteers and our civilian safety structures at physical risk or at operational risk. Because everything that we show, how they act and what they do, could possibly give criminal syndicates a tip-off. So we had to be very wary about how we go about filming it, what we show. There are many things that I wish I could show that I can't, simply because I'm not going to put anyone at risk. So that was one of the trickiest parts of this documentary. But I think we achieved it, and we put together an honest story without displaying too much of how we operate.
And there was a bit of foreshadowing in Open Borders 1. You were on the trail of a hijacked vehicle, but unfortunately, you were working together with the border security forces there, and unfortunately, you were just a moment too late to recover it. But in this second installment of Open Borders, you actually have a success in that regard. Can you tell us a bit more about that for those that haven't seen it?
Yeah, that was very interesting because so the first Open Borders, we were chasing a vehicle that was hijacked in South Africa, and they were trying to smuggle it across the Zimbabwean border, which they eventually did successfully after getting stuck in the river, and we were just too late. In this episode, we actually intercepted a stolen vehicle that was hijacked in South Africa, smuggled out, I don't know through how many countries, eventually relicensed and resold in Malawi, and then driven back from Malawi by a Malawian citizen all the way back to South Africa, passed back into South Africa. And when he came back in, that's where we picked up that the vehicle was stolen. So I don't know if this guy's story, if he was telling the truth or not, but according to him, he bought it legally in Malawi, which is possible because we know that a lot of these vehicles and motor parts do get stolen in South Africa, get recycled, rebranded, relicensed in other countries, resold to unsuspecting citizens there. And then they end up with a problem should they ever cross into South Africa, that they get stopped, and we manage to notice that the license numbers and the VIN numbers and things don't match up. So it is a big problem, and that's also where the theme of the documentary comes from, the Carjacker's Carnival, because these vehicles and motor parts are just circulating throughout the static region like a carnival wheel. And every now and again we get lucky and we manage to run into one of them. But a lot of people are also unsuspecting victims when it comes to this.
Right. And sometimes it even goes beyond that. Sometimes some of these vehicles show up in Middle Eastern conflicts with South African number plates, and
yeah,
it's a wild thing.
Yeah, there have been many reports of that, of South African stolen vehicles ending up in Middle Eastern conflicts and other conflict areas in Africa, especially the reliable 4x4 brands, which I don't need to mention. There's a big market for them, and it does happen. Yeah, it's a fact.
Hmm. And the bottom line of your story of the stolen vehicle is whether the person that was driving it into South Africa was guilty or not. A stolen vehicle was recovered, and that is the important thing. Jacques, we have a message here from Dagbreker who says, Goeienaand Erns en Jacques, waardeer Jacques se werk absoluut opreg. Dit verg baie murg in jou pype. Wel, baie dankie Dagbreker vir jou baie mooi kommentaar daarso. Just a reminder to those watching live, you can ask any questions that you have or any comments regarding the documentary or the subject matter, and I'll try to get to as many as possible. I'll see if I can work them in as the conversation progresses. Jacques, another thing that's I think very important to note here is when it comes to the types of crime that you're fighting here and encountering here on the border, is it? I mean, it's just for clarity's sake, it's not one massive criminal syndicate; it's multiple criminal syndicates, from your impression, that are operating here cross border and that you have to combat here.
Yeah, it's definitely multiple syndicates. But these guys are also very clever. So you'll often find that higher up syndicate bosses will use multiple unaligned syndicates to do certain work. So should one syndicate get arrested or busted or die out because of internal conflict or whichever other reason, the other lines will still keep on operating. And which what we've also found is that these guys also tend to shift from crime to crime. So you find guys who smuggle vehicles. When it gets too hot, they'll hop over to smuggling something else. Whether it be firearms or explosives or narcotics. Narcotics is also a major problem. It comes in from the ocean side in Mozambique and then gets brought across into South Africa and then on to other African countries. So these guys are really professionals at what they do, and we need to rise to that level to stop them.
Well, it's all about going the extra mile. I'm going to give the live viewers some attention here before we continue, because there's some great comments here coming in live. Sideliner Opinion says South Africa has become the elephant carcass in the African bush. All the predators and scavengers are feasting on its leftovers. Only a few white bones will be left when the party is over. That's a very poetic and cynical way of describing it, but absolutely a good comment.
Can I add something there?
Yeah, sure.
On the poetic level, that was a very good comment, but I think in that case, you can decide whether you're going to be a hyena or a lion, and that's a choice that we all need to make.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great comment. Artie Pandey says, wow, I had no idea that hijacked vehicles end up in conflict zones. Yes, that's actually a very funny detail when it comes to this type of crime. And then Helen Duplessis says guessing Land Rovers are safe. I'm not going to start a debate. And GMS Elf AfriForum says die dominee was skuldig. Sideliner Opinions says hijacking cars is a well-organized business. It has nothing to do with poverty and inequality. And then there was another comment here. Jake says ons is daarom net 44 Afrikaans sprekendes hier. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jacques, now that I've read some of the comments, there's another thing that you showcase in your documentary that's really impressive, and I think it's taking these types of initiatives to the next level. And that is the employment of sniffer dogs that can, well, maybe I'm not going to remember it wrong. Let me just ask you directly, what can they sniff out? Is it just drugs? Is it weapons? Can they, what's everything that they can do?
Yeah, so a dog is an amazing force multiplier, and it's a resource that you need to decide how you're going to utilize. So any dogs are naturally born with incredible sniffer instincts. It depends what you train them specifically to sniff. There are some dogs who are trained to be attack dogs and sniffer dogs, but it's not generally the case, and it's usually a bit frowned upon. The people who train dogs and who are experts in this tend to focus on giving a dog a certain expertise. So often you would find that, say, explosives and firearms are categorized into a certain sniffing condition, because obviously gunpowder also has traces in explosives. That there are similarities there. Certain dogs are specifically trained to sniff out narcotics, but it's all about what you train the dog to do, and then these dogs can focus on specifically doing that task.
And you were actually the test rabbit or the guinea pig for these dogs to demonstrate their talents. In the documentary, you tried your best to hide from them, and you were swiftly taken down and found out. What was that experience like? Did you doubt their abilities and how good they were? And were you surprised at how fast they were able to track you down?
I didn't doubt their abilities at all. I was extremely surprised at how quickly they tracked me down. I mean, when I was sitting up in that tree watching I could see the dog following my trail, running up and down. But it's not like movies where the dog stops and sniffs and then looks and carries on. This dog just runs. He just runs and he starts running in the right direction, and eventually he tracks you down to the tree. And a bit of background information on that scene. People might think that I was trying to be clever by hiding up a tree. The dog handler actually told me, "Listen, get up a tree because I don't want you to get bitten." Now the challenge was that these are Belgian Malinois, and anyone who's seen Belgian Malinois on YouTube videos will know that these dogs can jump 15 feet. They climb trees like cats. So I was, to be honest, I was quite a bit nervous up there, and he told me what to say to the dog and the correct keywords to use when the dog finds me to calm her down. And I actually afterwards, this dog just wanted to take me because it set in on a target. It found me, and now it's excited and needs to get that energy out. So I had to get down. He calmed the dog down, and I had to go and pet the dog eventually, to show that, okay, we're over that now. We're friends again. So that was a bit of a nervous experience because I could see this dog wanted me badly, but I petted her, and then she immediately switched back. Training kicked in, and she was her loving self. But yeah, it was a great experience, and it's amazing to see how these dogs are utilized, and the amazing relationship between the handlers and the dogs. It's really amazing. It's like a tactical SWAT team operating on absolute years of training and instinct combined.
Right. No, it was definitely impressive to watch, and as you said, this is now a new tool in the arsenal of these community organizations that are defending the border and their communities. I mean, this is not something they've always had. It's actually something that recently they acquired through AfriForum that is making what they do possible. Sideline Opinion says protecting borders is a specialized activity. In the old days, Bushman trackers and tracker dogs were used to track down insurgents. Yeah, no, you need to use everything at your disposal. Helen says Jacques with the dogs wanted you as a snack. And Hendo 1974 says, who let the dogs out? AfriForum, obviously. So yeah, no, it was a very interesting part, that of the documentary, actually showcasing some of the different techniques and the tools that in this case living tools that these volunteers have at their disposal. But there's still a lot to do, and there's still a lot to equip them with to make their job even more effective. I think a central question that's not just of relevance to the Mozambican border, but specifically to every border with South Africa, is what is crossing these borders? Is it drugs, weapons, people, different types of crime? There's all these different dark realities when it comes to the borders with South Africa. But let's focus in, seeing as this is your documentary's focus, specifically the Mozambican border. What, except stolen vehicles, what else is crossing this border from what you've heard from the people protecting these borders?
We know that, I mean, I can start off by telling you that anything you can think of crosses that border. But we can start off with illegal immigrants, people desperate for a better life, some coming across with the intent of committing crimes. Then you go on to goods. Goods you can find, obviously vehicles is a big issue. Firearms is a big issue. Ivory, rhino horn is a big issue. Narcotics, a very, very big issue. There are tons of narcotics that come across that border. I know from our safety structures, our guys have intercepted trucks where the entire I'm trying to find the correct term now. Basically, the axle of the truck was covered in housing, and it was just packed with pure cocaine. These are the type of things that are coming across there. Human trafficking is a very big problem. I think if those who follow the news will have seen that recently there was a case that was postponed in, I think, Johannesburg, where the Hawks actually raided a warehouse that was owned by a foreign national, and they found a bunch of Malawian children working in there who were smuggled across our borders. So a lot of the stuff is taking place, and a big problem. Yes, cigarettes. I see Sideline Opinion says cigarettes as well. Definitely not only from Zimbabwe, definitely coming in from Mozambique. One of the main issues that we see in Mozambique is they have solid ports. And what I mean by solid is safe for ships. I don't mean solid in terms of control or in terms of security. So it's very easy for anything to dock close to the Mozambican border without being detected, or with being detected, but no one's going to react to it. They don't have a navy who's going to respond to say, why is this foreign vessel in our territory? And things just get offloaded from there, and then from there smuggled across border into South Africa. So absolutely anything you can think of. Another major problem, which might not be such a dramatic issue, but definitely does have financial impact, is counterfeit goods. All the fake Adidas and Nike brand shirts and shoes you see, those things come across from there. So absolutely anything you can think of is brought in from there.
And I see here there's firstly a comment and then a question. Sideline Opinion says asset strippers prefer open borders, no pressure on government from corporates. Specifically, talking about stripping vehicles, Jacques, there's in your documentary a very striking image of how quickly these criminals go to work, stripping a vehicle clean, taking all the parts that they can sell, even if it was stolen just a day ago in South Africa.
No, and it's not even a day. You're talking about an hour, 2 hours. These guys are, depending on the size of the team and whether there's any interference in terms of tracking the vehicle or police interference or neighborhood watch or whatever, these guys are extremely quick. They are very professional. They're very good at what they do. I wish we could expend that energy and that expertise in a positive way. Those guys would be actually absolute specialists in a country where they could do something positive. But no, they're very good at what they do, and it literally it's a matter of an hour, maybe two, and they can take a whole vehicle apart, strip down every part. The tracker is removed immediately. When these guys hijack a vehicle, the tracking system is removed while they're still driving away from the cops. It's done in the vehicle. One guy would be driving, one guy would be scanning through the dash and all the places that they know these things are hidden, or using scanning systems to find the tracker, get rid of it, and then they would just break that vehicle apart. As you can see in the documentary, it's really, there's nothing left of that car. Even if they manage to track it down, it's still a write-off. There's nothing you can do with the wreckage that's left of it.
Yeah, you just have you just get the confirmation that it's your vehicle. One more comment before I get to the question. White Zulu says, pity they can't smuggle electricity into South Africa. Yeah, no, that's absolute pity. I'm very sad about that. RT Panda has a question for you, Jacques. He asks, what about the unsuspecting buyers on the other side? Do they play a role in exposing the network of sellers in their country?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Unfortunately, our scope is limited to South Africa and what happens within South African borders, where we are citizens and we have a mandate under the Constitution and under the Criminal Procedures Act to participate in preventing these activities or apprehending transgressors. So I'm not sure about that. That part of the investigation still lies with the South African Police Service and the the prosecuting authority. So I don't know. I would hope that they do, but I can't see that they actually would from a practical point of view, unless there's some kind of deal made, saying that, okay, give them up and we'll let you go. But I can't see that happening, because that would mean that the South African government would need to employ foreign relations and people like Interpol and our assets in other countries to actually prevent crime, and they can't even do it on their own ground base here. So I can't see that happening. If you look at how long we've been trying to get the Guptas delivered to South Africa, for instance, it's been a few years now. High-profile case, state capture, Jacob Zuma, millions and millions and millions of rands all over the news, and still nothing's happened. So a lowlife who just hijacked and smuggles vehicles, I can't see them bothering with that.
Something that I just thought of in regards to specifically, it's related to this question, is the fact that when it comes to the efforts of these communities, they can do the best for their community, these volunteers, but there still needs to be pressure on government to manage the entire border. I mean, it's impossible to expect one small community to perfectly secure a massive line of border kilometers long. Can you tell us a bit more specifically on that aspect of still putting pressure on government to do their job, seeing as with economies of scale, the government is actually the body that is the only one that's really capable of managing the entire border, as I see it?
Well, the government is the only one who has the resources to do that.
Right.
You can have 1 million solidly trained, good-hearted, committed volunteers. If they don't have resources, it's the task is going to become impossible. And that's unfortunately one of the challenges that we face. We're trying to do government's job without government's funding. So that is a big problem. And that's why from AfriForum's side, we focus very strongly on not only making a difference on the ground, building these safety structures, training people, getting them involved, but also driving campaigns to put pressure on government, because that's extremely essentially important. And we've seen that it's actually paid off recently. Even though you might question government's attempts, at least something is happening. So it's extremely important. We have to keep on pressuring them. We have to, because at the end of the day, neighborhood watch members, civilian safety structures, CPFs can still only do so much. They can do what's necessary to prevent a crime or to apprehend a suspect and to keep others safe. But they can't do the prosecution. There is room for private prosecution in South Africa, but that's a whole different complicated topic. So at the end of the day, we still depend on law enforcement and the South African Police Service to perform their duty, even if you give them a baked pie in terms of a suspect caught with evidence, apprehended, you take it to the police station, then you need to hand that suspect over. And unfortunately, many times our guys encounter that a guy they arrested last night for serious or violent crime, they just run into him in town the next day. And that is a major problem, because we know that unfortunately there seems to be a huge lack of motivation in the South African Police Service. There's a lack of training, and there's also a lot of corruption. That being said, there are still a lot of dedicated and honest and hardworking law enforcement officers out there, and I give them all the credit that they deserve. But unfortunately, these other problems are also complicating their efforts.
And on that note, I want to I think this is a very important point. So I want to cast the net a bit wider, and that comes to the fact of specifically what can communities realistically do when it comes to securing an entire border. That's not realistic, as someone pointed out, but it is very, very realistic to secure your neighborhood, to secure your street, to secure your corner of your community. That's the first step. And I wanted to ask you, Jacques, seeing as you're very involved with community safety structures and what they do, can you tell us a bit more about in the past few years how that capacity and capability has developed, just from what you've experienced and seen in regards to communities keeping their own neighborhoods safe and secure?
Well, I can give you a bit of a breakdown, but let me put it into context. So AfriForum specifically, we organize neighborhood watches. So the neighborhood structure operates from and depends on different sections of law than, say, a community policing forum would, where a community policing forum is still responsible or accountable to the South African Police Service at the end of the day. Neighborhood watch structures are accountable to their communities. So everything we do is within the confines of the law. There's enough scope within the Criminal Procedures Act and the Constitution to allow us to operate legally, but we're not accountable to a government body. And that's a big difference between how we operate and how our other civilian safety structures operate, who unfortunately often still have some political interference. But I can tell you from AfriForum's side how we've exponentially grown over the last 10 years. The first AfriForum Neighborhood Watch was founded with 4 members in 2012 in Vryburg. So that's 10 years ago. Today we're standing at 10,000 trained volunteers who play a role in keeping the community safe. And from our side, from AfriForum head office side, what we do is we empower these people with training, firstly legally, to understand why they are allowed to play a role in keeping the community safe. We train them how to operate when they encounter dangerous situations, how to perform citizens' arrests, etc., all the legal aspects firstly. And then a lot of the guys who choose to go on to get more specialized training also get more specialized training, like our proto team training and our information gathering training and all kinds of different training options that we offer within our safety structures. So we've grown, like I said, from 4 to 10,000. And I think that paints, with recent developments in the country, that paints a very good picture of where we're heading in terms of community involvement in community safety.
Do you have some recent successes that you are very proud of, that you think demonstrate this increase in capacity? Something that recently happened, 1 or 2 things that you think will demonstrate that this isn't just an exercise in a theoretical exercise, but it's actually bearing fruit?
Yeah, I'll use one good example because I got some unexpected feedback from it. The other day, I actually posted a tweet about an incident where one of our neighborhood watchers in Gauteng was involved. and it was a multi-vehicle accident, and one of the occupants was actually trapped inside a burning vehicle. And I said in the tweet that our Neighborhood Watch members, who many of them are also medically trained, with the assistance of other role players, because there were some paramedics on the scene as well, they managed to free this person from the wreckage. And then the AfriForum fire team put out the fire. And people were saying, "What? You have a fire team?" I was like, "Yeah, we have many fire teams across the country."
Well, Johannesburg only has one working fire truck, not an exaggeration.
It's I don't want to paint a false picture. We don't have fire trucks, but we do have Land Cruisers with water tanks and pressure pumps, and the guys are trained in firefighting, especially in the rural areas where we know that a small fire can cause massive damage. We've seen this many times. So our guys are trained in all of those eventualities, and we have different people who specialize in different safety aspects in these structures. You have armed response type people who are trained tactically. You have guys who are medically trained. You have guys who are trained in firefighting, and then we also have something that's growing very strongly is our air wing. We have a number of drones, unarmed operated vehicles that we employ countrywide, and often we use those drones at the request of law enforcement to assist them to track down suspects and to help them with information, especially during times of riots and etc. To name one of the successes, I think on Sunday night, one of our neighborhood watchers in Bloemfontein was again requested by the SAPS to help them with an aerial search, because they had received information that there was going to be a big cable theft operation that was going to take place. These guys were planning on stealing meters of cable, because we've seen that's become a trend where as soon as load shedding hits, the guys know that the cables are dead. They can handle them. They can cut them. I've seen that in my own neighborhood many times. And so they deployed the drone. They saw these guys busy trying to steal the cables, and they reacted. So many of them fled, unfortunately, but they managed to apprehend one suspect, and they managed to put those guys on the back foot, and they prevented them from disrupting an entire municipal area from power. Even worse than load shedding is currently disrupting us. So There are many successes. Our guys play a great active role, and I'm very excited about where we're heading with this.
Yeah, and especially in regards to farm attacks as well. I'm aware of at least one farm attack that you've thwarted this year, and at least 2 instances where farm attackers were caught afterwards and handed over to the authorities. Can you elaborate a bit on that, seeing as a lot of my viewers also care deeply about that issue?
Yeah. So AfriForum has 159 civilian safety structures countrywide. That's the fancy term. We like to just call them buurtwagte or neighborhood watchers. And those are spread throughout urban and rural areas. Many of them are in rural and farming communities. And those guys have a lot to deal with in terms of farm attacks and rural safety, because we know that even if you live in an urban area, and one of the most well-funded urban areas, proper police service is a challenge. You're not going to get it in South Africa due to various reasons. So when you're living in a small, isolated farming community where your closest neighbor is tens of kilometers away, you can imagine how tricky the policing situation is there. So those guys also have very specific operational plans and requirements and things that they put in place to be able to respond to these situations. Over the last couple of years, they've also gained a lot of experience. They now know how to respond to these situations. They know which are the most likely areas that these people will flee to after an attack, or if an attack is disrupted. They know all these routes, and they understand this crime phenomenon very well. And because these guys are so actively involved, and because they live in those communities themselves, they're not some outsider just coming in to do policing. They live there, they care deeply, and they know the area. That's the other key. They know the area, they know the people, they know the lay of the land, they know the communities, and that's what makes this so extremely successful. It's not as successful as we would want it to be. If it was, then we would have 0 farm attacks. But the tide is turning. We are getting there. More and more people are becoming aware that they need to take their own safety into their own hands. They need to get involved. They need to be aware, or as we say in Afrikaans, paraat. And that penny is dropping, and people are getting involved, and it's making a difference.
One last question on specifically the neighborhood watches and safety structures before we start wrapping up, and that is you mentioned medical training and firefighter training. You've also got something called proto-spanner, but that involves specific specialized training. Can you, seeing as a lot of people are unaware of what type of training is being provided to AfriForum's neighborhood watches, what else except medical and firefighting training is being done?
So to give you some background, in a standard AfriForum neighborhood watch setup, we have basically we have 3 legs. We have the information leg, we have the tactical leg, and we have the support leg. So the information leg would be people who purely focus on gathering information, vetting that information, sending it through to the right people. Tactical leg would be the people responding to scenes. So those would include proto-spanleden, proto-team members, which I'll get into now. And other support structures, and then the support leg, which are the people who actually monitor cameras, make sure that when there's a large firefighting operation, the guys get supplied with water, look after them and the other role players involved, including the firefighters, government firefighters, all the SAPS. We always try and build those relationships. So that's the basic layout. So what our proto teams are about, these are the guys who are involved with the neighborhood watch, who are committed and who are willing to take on bigger risks, and they enroll on our proto team training. And proto team training is very tactical. It's shooting from inside a vehicle. It's shooting under fire. It's evacuating wounded persons under fire. So it's a very tactical leg, but it also includes a lot of practical and legal knowledge. So it covers basic things such as setting up a JSOC, a Joint Security Operations Command Center, which you can run from a vehicle. But if you have a major accident on a highway, you need central JSOC points. And a lot of people don't understand how to set that up in a safe way, where it's functional, where you're not going to stand the risk of other cars driving into you. From a tactical operational perspective, these guys need to be trained to be able to be under fire, still make the correct radio call to call for backup and whatever backup they need while returning fire. So there's a lot of the tactical elements that go into this training that we present to these members. And this training is absolutely free for any AfriForum Neighborhood Watch member. The only catch is that you need to be nominated by your neighborhood watch or your branch. So that's a great vetting system for us, because these guys know who are the people who are dedicated and who would be able to actually handle this kind of pressure. And those guys get trained. Yeah.
I see our colleague Rainer Dievenage is tuned in en hy sê lekker manne. Wel dankie Rainer dat jy ingeskakel het. And also just a word of thank you. I see Sideline Opinion says thank you Hindu for all the moderating and marketing you do for CC and AfriForum. I hope they appreciate it. No, I absolutely appreciate it. Hindu is my top moderator here on my YouTube channel. He's also a volunteer. He does it absolutely for free. So thank you very much, Hindu. Jacques, as we start wrapping up, I think there's a question that a lot of people would be curious about, and that is, where's Open Borders 3 going? How are you going to jump the shark this time? How are you going to take it to the next level? Is there anything you can tell us?
What I can say is that there are talks of more episodes. Should a final decision on that be made, unfortunately, I will not be able to divulge where it will be or when it will be due to operational reasons. But there are talks in the pipeline.
Excellent. Well, I'll definitely be keeping people up to date. And then the last question that I want to ask you is definitely the most important one, and that is, what can people do to get involved, firstly, and secondly, to support the type of work that these volunteers do? In what way can people meaningfully contribute to everything that you've described here tonight?
If I had to be absolutely objective about the matter, I would say just get involved with your closest and nearest civilian safety structure. Start playing a role. Everyone is not up to chasing down bad guys, carrying guns and running around in bulletproofs. I absolutely understand that. There's a role for everyone to play in these civilian safety structures. I mean, some of our most successful civilian safety structures have 70-year-old Tannies running the information network. Because she's on WhatsApp all day. That's what she does. And she sits on the stoop and she watches the main
intel road. Officer.
And they are so extremely successful and capable. So there's really a role for everyone to play. That's my objective opinion. If I had to be honest, I would say get involved with your nearest AfriForum Neighborhood Watch. You can go to www.afriforumbuurtwag.co.za. Look up your nearest neighborhood watch. If you don't see your neighborhood or neighborhood close to you on the list, send us an email. There's an email address on the website, and you can start up one. You can start up. You'll get the support from head office. You'll get the training. You can start up a neighborhood watch, and you can enlist other people to join you in this effort. So that's my biggest message. Yes, it's important to put political pressure on government. We have to. This country cannot continue under the leadership that we have at the moment. But that is still going to take quite some time. The soonest solution for this at the moment, the most practical solution, is get involved and do something.
Absolutely. And there's another way I know that you can get to that page that you described on where to see the closest neighborhood watch to you is you go to the AfriForum website and you just click on the Get Involved tab. I know that's at the top there. That also takes you to the same place. And I think that's a very important thing to know, is that you can actually very easily see if there's a neighborhood watch close to you. Then, of course, if you are not in a position where you can become involved in a neighborhood watch, you can also just become a member of AfriForum by going to the website and clicking join. Jacques, thank you very much for your incredible insights and also for the great documentary that you produced. Everyone that tuned in and that has not seen the documentary, you can find it. There's a link in the description of this conversation, of this video, to Open Borders 2. If you've not watched Open Borders 1, go watch that as well. You'll easily find it. If you just search AfriForum Open Borders, to play it safe. I think if you type in Open Borders, it will be one of the first results, but to play safe, say AfriForum Open Borders, you'll find both of the documentaries as well. And before you say goodbye, just a few comments here. White Zulu says, I've really enjoyed the stream. Many thanks to both of you. Well, thank you very much, White Zulu, for tuning in and staying for the entire time. The Freighter Watcher, I know she's tuning in from the United States. She says, thank you for another great stream, interesting conversation, informative guest. Sideliner Opinion says, thank you, Jacques and Arends and AfriForum for handing out life jackets on our sinking SS South Africa. Well, we do what we can. There's the AfriForum website from Hendo. Thank you very much. www.afriforum.co.za. Also, if you're watching abroad and you want to support initiatives like this in South Africa, State-proof solutions, you can become a friend of AfriForum. You just Google Friends of AfriForum and you can support us in that way. I see here Artie Pandey says good evening all. Great stream as always. Well, thank you, Artie, for always tuning in. I always see you there in the chat. So, Jacques, thank you for your valuable time once again, and we'll chat to you again soon after the release of Open Borders 3 when that inevitably happens. And also thank you to everyone that tuned in. Thank you for all your great questions, and thank you for all your comments. And then if you're new to this channel, you can also subscribe for more conversations like this, and you can also leave a comment. If you're not watching live and you're watching afterwards, you can still take part in the conversation in the comment section. I read all the comments and respond to as many as I can. So cheers, guys. Have a good one, and God bless.